Just a quick disclaimer, guys, before we actually start the video. There's a lot of background noise in this video. I do apologize. The studio's not on a building site. Should hopefully just be as a one-off. But hope you enjoy the video, inshallah. Assalamu Alaykum, my dear respected brothers and sisters. Welcome to another episode of the اركب Thoughts podcast. Today's episode, we're talking dress code, we're talking hairstyles, and we're talking fashion, and how all of this impacts us as Muslims in the West. Now, there's some really important questions that we want to get into, and we feel that sometimes a larger emphasis is placed on hairstyles and on fashion than maybe needs to be. Okay, so what we want to talk about is there some particular type of clothing that we need to be wearing? What are the principles of the clothing that we need to wear? Does our clothes have such a huge impact that it affects whether or not we pray? And another question that we want to get into is, provided that the clothing or the style fits the traditions and the principles of Islam, then do we need to wear a specific item of clothing? Does it need to be according to a particular culture? Or is Islam diverse and allows us to dip between cultures provided the initial principles are met? Right, so let's get into it. But before we do, please hit the like button down below. Subscribe to the channel, and that will help us a lot in trying to get the content out there and to share our thoughts, especially if you're enjoying it as well. But before we do today, Kasim, I've got a coffee with me. Today's been a long day at work, man, and I feel like today's going to be an interesting topic, and I'm gonna have to be finely tuned and well aware and wide awake. So let's get started. Okay, so initially what we want to talk about, like we said, we mentioned the 3 different sections. Let's start with dress code first. Okay, tell me, what are your thoughts to begin with, and then I'll dip in and out, and we can continue the conversation.
Right, in terms of dress code, I don't want to maybe play devil's advocate here, but is Islam, or do we reckon Islam is very restrictive in how a person can dress? Do you reckon there's only one way of dressing? Or do you reckon, alhamdulillah, Islam, that this vast religion has given us such principles that allows every sort of person from every sort of culture, race, sort of continent, because Islam has spread throughout the 4 corners of the world, allows the person to live wherever he is in different sort of climates and dress in a certain manner which fits the principles of Islam?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, and there's obviously a wider question behind this as well, Kasim. The wider question is the impact of culture and religion and whether they mix or not as well. So I think what I want to do is I want to start there, begin the conversation from there, and then we can move forward into actual dress sense.
That's fine.
So I think my 2 pennies worth in terms of culture and religion is they are perfectly fine to mix. You know, a lot of people, they have this connotation, they have this understanding that Islam says no to culture. No, it doesn't. Okay, the Islamic art is dependent upon culture. I see so many people across the world, let's say in one particular type of art, in calligraphy. Okay, there's Kufic styles that are based from people in Iraq. There are styles from as far east as China, okay, and the influence that they have had on calligraphy as well. There's even people who are doing more Western style calligraphy as well. So this is just one example, and I think the point here is culture can intertwine with religion, provided the culture and the principles of the culture that you're implementing does not clash with the principles of Islam. Okay, and what I'm trying to say here is this applies in the same way in clothing as well. And to give an example, when I was in university, one of the things that is beautiful about university is you see so many people from so many different backgrounds. You see African brothers and sisters. You see brothers and sisters that have come from Europe. You see brothers and sisters that have come from the Middle East. You see brothers and sisters that have come from the subcontinent. And you see brothers and sisters that have come from the Far East. Okay, and the beauty that you see is we weren't unified in wearing a specific item of clothing, but the unity was in the principle behind the clothing. You know, I mean, we joke, right? But you've seen me wear a sarong. According to the Indonesians and the Malaysians, they have what's called a sarong. The subcontinental people know that as a lungi, and it tends to be like bright, beautiful colors. You know, one of the beautiful things about Jummah in university that I really used to enjoy was seeing the people coming from their own cultures and taking their culture to heart and being happy to show that culture and wear the clothing that's associated with their culture. Honestly, it was beautiful, man. I used to really enjoy seeing that. And I think that's what the sort of route that we're going down and that we want to talk now. So yeah, sorry, carry on.
So you're alluding to the fact that because Islam is so diverse, every person from every sort of way of life can actually practice Islam in its own way, just as long as they follow the principles. Okay, so alhamdulillah, that's something that I agree with as well. Alhamdulillah, Islam has given us principles. It's not given us one sort of way what we follow. Even, we don't want to get into this discussion, but even fiqh, yeah, there are principles which are there, but there are different ways of, even, for example, just performing your salah. There's no one way of saying this is the only correct way, because it's not. There are so many different correct ways of performing your salah, just for example. Okay, so the discussion we have today is that as us guys living in the West, how should we dress according to the principles that Islam has given to us? One of the things is to briefly outline the principles that Islam has given to us. So, for example, we are told to dress modestly. We are told to wear loose clothing, and we are also told to dress in a manner which doesn't reveal our body. Okay. Now, the question that I want to ask you now is that, is there only one type of clothing which fits this criteria, or is there many different types of clothing which fits this criteria?
I'll take that as a rhetorical question. I'll let you continue. But yeah, there's multiple types of clothing that would fit the bill.
Okay. So now I just want to highlight a sort of issue that it does arise, especially in I've seen it in our subcontinent sort of communities, in where you see a youngster, he's wearing just say jeans and a shirt, or jeans and a jacket, for example, or a hoodie, and he comes to the masjid for salah. Now, I know this is very sad, but I know many youngsters who have been turned away from the masjid, or once they've been praying salah, after salah, they've been told off, or somebody has said something to them saying that, why are you wearing this type of clothing? You should be wearing the thobe, you should be wearing this sort of particular type of clothing. Now, that's something which I don't find is correct. Why? Because first of all, he's fulfilling the principles, his body is covered, his clothes are not tight, he can perform his salah. Why are we making things difficult for our youngsters living in this country? Because let's be honest, even the people in the subcontinent sort of community, they don't wear what the Arab Bedouins used to wear. They wear a clothing which comes from the subcontinent. Because even the thobe of the jubba today is not the thobe and the jubba which was in the time of the Bedouins. Even the kurta today, that wasn't in the time of the... Yeah, it's close to, but that's taken from the subcontinent more than it's taken from the Arab Bedouins. So are we preferring culture here, or are we preferring Islam?
I think, for me, the way that I see it is, provided a person fits the principles of loose and modest clothing, and there are other principles as well. I mean, we're mentioning just loose and modest clothing to begin with, but there are other things as well. Like you mentioned, revealing of skin. This is something that we don't necessarily permit within Islam. There are other things as well that, you know, we may not highlight in this particular podcast, but they do exist, and most are well acquainted with these ideas as well. So we don't want to get necessarily into the nitty-gritty. But the way that I see it is, provided that somebody can fulfill the rights of Allah, which is the performance of salah, if the clothing is sufficient to pray salah in, then that clothing is sufficient and is permissible to wear within public. And I think that's generally the ideology that we have to have. And I think we have to backtrack a bit here as well. I think we have to caveat it here, saying there's a difference between what is the best form of clothing to wear, or what is the most ideal form of clothing to wear, compared to what is permissible to wear. And I think, especially in this day and age, living in the West, living in the 21st century, although we want to be the best that we can be, it's not always possible, or it's not always easy, shall we say, for our youngsters to implement that. And we need to understand that. If we are pushing to have the best form, or the most ideal form, and by that we drive people away from the masjid, we drive people away from the Book of Allah, we drive people away from Islam, then I think that's very problematic, because you're chasing the ideal when they're doing something which is permissible. Okay,
Okay, so let me just stop you here. Why do you reckon we have that notion in our communities? Why do you reckon what I've seen it sometimes a youngster comes into the mosque and he's not wearing a topi, for example, he's not wearing a hat, okay? And after Salah somebody would tell him, oh, you should be wearing a topi, you can't pray namaz. No, like just leave him, let him go. He's praying Salah, in the 21st century, a youngster coming to the masjid praying Salah. What more do you want? Those other things that you're seeing, the idea, this is the cherry on the top. He's coming to leave him. It will come with time.
I think this is the thing that sometimes we have become impatient in the way that we advise. Impatient and unwise. There's a time and a place to have conversations with people, and the thing is, we aren't biding the time. We aren't waiting for the moment. We want to be very blunt, and I think, like I said, the problem is that if somebody is making this choice to talk about the clothing or the way one dresses with somebody, you need to understand your relationship with that person first, and you need to understand, are you the right person to tackle this, and is it the right opportunity to do so, and are you going to cause more harm than good? Okay, if there's a possibility, and a very high possibility, that you are going to cause more harm than good, then maybe it might not be appropriate. And sometimes I think we have to take that step back at that point. So yeah, and I think there are other points to consider as well. And sometimes I'm not saying that we don't consider these points, and people who advise in this manner don't consider these points, but we do need to remember, in the age that we're living in, that Muslims in this country, in the West generally, have been attacked. Okay, both physically, emotionally, psychologically, within the public, within workspaces, sometimes even within their own homes as well. And some people do feel fear, of dressing in a manner as a Muslim. Some people feel fear to show other people or show the public that they are Muslim, and we have to be aware of the journey that people are going along. Me and you, we have beards, okay, and publicly people know that we are Muslim. We don't shy away from that, but not everybody is.
Well, now I'd argue against, and I'd say, beards come into fashion, so it doesn't really represent I'm a Muslim, because even a non-Muslim has a beard, so how do you differentiate?
Okay, fair point.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so that definitely is one aspect in terms of the beard, but in terms of clothing, once you wear a thobe or once you wear a salwar kameez, then it's very evident, or a high probability, that you are a Muslim. And like I said, I think this is something that we need to be wary of and we need to be careful of, both in terms of our young brothers and our young sisters as well, because we also want to talk about the hijab and the niqab as well. But I don't want to get into the polemics about which is wajib and which is not wajib. That's up to you as an individual to consult your own scholars. We aren't qualified to do that. But what we can talk about is that there are many young girls out there who are worried about how society will perceive them, or not necessarily just perceive them, like what someone might do to them.
Yeah, and I've heard so many stories. People come tell me what's happened to their wives or people that they know in public just because they were wearing a scarf or they were wearing a niqab.
Yeah.
We may live in a community where this doesn't happen, but in other parts of the UK or other parts of the West, these things do happen. And these are things that we need to consider and not make a sort of blanket sort of statement upon everybody saying, no, you have to dress like this. No, you have to take other things into factor. Okay, sorry, let you carry on.
Yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to talk about was converts, people who convert to Islam. We know that it's a very common thing in the West right now as well. And alhamdulillah, many people are reading into Islam, especially after the way that the media is portraying us. Some people are choosing to read into Islam and do their own research, or they come into contact with good Muslims who point them in the right direction, and they, of their own free will, decide to become Muslims. And sometimes what happens is these very people who have become new Muslims, sometimes they'll go into the community of Muslims, and unfortunately they are told about, you need to do X, Y, and Z, which aren't necessarily amongst the farida, or amongst the things which need to be done foremost. Okay, and clothing is amongst one of them. Dress sense is amongst one of them. So I think this is our 2 pence worth in terms of.
I just want to end this here, or I want to move on, but I just want to say that yeah, it's very very easy to grow a beard and put on a thobe and wear a topi. That's very very easy. Let's be honest. It doesn't take long. Maybe a few weeks. You get over that societal pressure. The hardest thing, or the most important thing, according to me, just my opinion, is changing the inside. That's what takes effort. That's what takes time, and that's what a true Muslim is. Is that his inside has changed, because the outside is just an exterior, you know. And this is again just an opinion, and we're going to mention this later on, but we shouldn't generalize. Just say we see a sister without any hijab. Wallahi, we don't know what she does in her spare time. We don't know how much Quran she prays, the salah that she reads. Wallahi, we don't know. I've seen so many sisters at university. They used to come to the prayer room. They'll have the hijab in the bag. You know, and like we talk about this societal pressure on, you know, women have been attacked a lot. You know, the struggle that they go through, we can't even understand. To look a certain way, to, you know, to be a certain way. And I saw sisters come into the prayer room and they would pray the salah. They would take off their makeup and they would put on their hijab and they would pray. But once they would leave the prayer room, they would take off their hijab. But you know what? One day, maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line, these same girls, these same women will get the opportunity to wear hijab full time. And like you said, it's a thing about time. It takes time. You know, we shouldn't be pushing people. We shouldn't be forcing things on people. You know, things happen naturally. You know.
I think at the same time, I also want to caveat as well. Like, I was a person, and I'm talking personal experience here, and I can't talk about from the female perspective. I'm talking about from my own perspective. When I was at university, I've had a beard from a very young age, and I chose, and it was my choice, that I would wear a thobe or a jubba in university. This is how I chose to dress, and I do feel that it has certain benefits as well in terms of being a Muslim, because it is protection for you. You know, if somebody knows that you are Muslim, or if you are portraying yourself as a Muslim, you realize that there are pressures to make sure that you act as a Muslim.
Yeah.
You know, you can't be wearing a thobe or a jubba and have a beard, and you're wearing a topi and you're delivering sermons from the khutbah, and then all of a sudden you're seen in places where you shouldn't be seen, or you're caught in actions that you should not be doing, or you're with groups of people who you shouldn't be with. And naturally, dressing in such a manner will have an impact, because it'll make you think twice before you do things like this. So there is definitely benefit, and I'm not negating any of the
definitely
benefit.
there's huge benefits, but it's what I want to say is that it's not the be all and end all.
Yeah,
There's
definitely.
much more to Islam than just the way that we dress, and I think that our communities, they need to get over this. That just because a certain person dresses a certain way doesn't really reflect on who he is. You know, and there's so many examples we're going to mention later on, inshallah. So stay tuned. But yeah.
I think the final thing that I want to end on before we move on to the next section is about companies, Muslim companies, fashion companies that are coming onto the market now, who are really helping in fulfilling the loose and modest clothing, and clothing which fulfills Islamic principles. And I just want to give a shout out to these kind of companies. You know, more in the female space and in the male space. I think in the male space generally we're okay, but especially for women who want to dress in a modest way, in a way that adheres to Islamic principles. I think in maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was very difficult. There weren't companies that were catering, and I don't want to talk about like luxury modest brands, because I also believe that they have their own space, they have their own place to be there, and there are a lot of them that are coming up now as well, and they have their own place. But I mean, in particular for me as a husband, I see my wife using certain websites, certain companies, and honestly, I make dua for these companies. Companies such as Modernisa, who supply or who provide for this market of loose and modest clothing, which is not see-through, which doesn't reveal the figure, whilst at the same time is also stylish as well. Because let's not beat around the bush here. We also want to wear things that are nice, that look nice as well, and that are not tacky as well. You know, that are good quality and are affordable. And like the company that I mentioned, alhamdulillah, you know, from my side, when I see my wife ordering from them, honestly, like, I don't know about them politically, I don't know who they are, I don't know what type of people they are, But just because they run a business like this, for me, it's a big thing. I make dua for that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
They're
keeps them
providing a need in
prosperous.
the market.
Yeah, definitely.
And they're
definitely.
making the life of Muslims a lot easier.
Mhm.
And you mentioned this thing about fashionable and neat and stuff. I just want to touch upon this as well. Is that you know, a big representation of being a Muslim, or to show publicly that you're a Muslim, is that you wear the thobe and you have a beard and you wear a topi and stuff. And this is just my 2 pence, but you know what? In the West, Allah's blessed us with money.
Mhm.
So we should try to look as neat as possible. And if you wear a jubba, wear a nice jubba. You know, even those ones who keep beards, you know, keep it groomed. You know,
Mhm.
if you need to, like me, I go to when I get a haircut, I get my face threaded. The reason why, because it just makes everything stand out. It makes things look nice. You know, look after yourself. You know, portray Islam in the best, beautiful manner because Allah loves beauty.
Mhm.
You know, so we should be doing that as well. We shouldn't be walking around, you know, with the jubba, which is like maybe not in the best manner, and our beards are if you don't suit a long beard, don't keep a long beard, keep it so it looks nice. You know, you meet the scholars from Egypt, Allah, you know, the way these people dress, smart, man. You know, they look the part, you know, their thobes, the other thobes, amazing. You know, then you meet the guys from Tunisia, you know, they have their thobes and their long jubbas, amazing, they look beautiful.
Mhm.
You know, and then the guys from Syria, mashallah, you know, they look the part. You know, so if we're gonna dress like that, you know, make sure that we look good.
Mhm.
You know, and we give the best of image of Islam to others as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's move on now. We've talked about fashion, we've talked about clothing. I think another thing which gets a lot of attention is hairstyles and haircuts. Now again, I want to go back to the same thing that I mentioned before about what's the best or the most ideal form of haircut, and it is the one that we are generally told about, that the most ideal form of haircut is to have level hair over the head. And again, this is something which is contested amongst the ulama. But is hair which is equal all over? Is that something which has to be adhered to, or is there flexibility within this as well?
Yeah, so in my opinion,
I'm asking your opinion because you can't give a verdict. You're not
No.
qualified enough.
again, it's the same thing about clothing, is that we shouldn't get too bogged down in these issues.
Mhm.
You know, if a person looks like a lunatic, okay, he needs to be told. If a person has a mohawk and is red, green, blue, for example, okay, he might need some nasiha, some advice in private, not in front of everybody, you know. But generally, like for me, if your hair it looks neat and it looks nice, you know, and you get a certain haircut because you look good in that manner, like, what's wrong with that? For example, I was listening to one of the muftis, and I'm not going to mention his name, but he said that, you know, even this debate among scholars, it's like just even us guys, when we get haircuts, we're not imitating the Christians and the Jews. We're not. I'm getting a certain haircut because that's what looks good on me, for example. You know, and again, like, why do we get so bogged down in the way somebody's hair is? Honestly, like, I'll be very sort of frank, but a person's hair doesn't really affect his relationship with Allah. You know, a person's hair, in the grand scheme of things, again, it's that cherry on the top. You know, and again, we shouldn't be turning away people or mistreating people or looking at people just because of their hair. I think that's very immature. I think if we want to be good Muslims or better Muslims, we need to look a lot further than that.
And I think that what we're trying to avoid here, and you can probably see it, we're trying to avoid the academics here. Because I don't feel it's the time and place to talk about the academic behind it and the ruling behind it. What we're trying to talk about and what we're trying to discuss here is for the general Muslim, the day-to-day Muslim. And what we're trying to discuss here is the shunning of the day-to-day Muslim from Muslim society, which results in that person going away from being a Muslim or attaching himself with a masjid. And it's a difficult conversation to have, you see, and that's why I think you can probably notice as well with the way that we're talking. Okay, it's not an easy conversation to have, but like I said, I think academically there is scope for a person to have unequal hair, and if there is scope for unequal hair to exist to a certain extent, you know, there's, like Kasim mentioned, there are certain haircuts which are completely shunned, and the general rule that I tend to follow and as me personally is, I won't cut my hair to an extent where skin is visible. Okay, because I don't think that's appropriate. Okay, and that's my own two pence worth. Okay, that person cuts their hair to the extent that skin is not visible. If it's equal or unequal, I'm not going to get a ruler out and start measuring your hair. You know, and I think this is the point that we're trying to make here. That as long as it looks neat, as long as
It looks presentable.
it looks presentable. And I think the way that I tend to judge it is that in a professional environment, would you fit in? Okay, we're not talking about an Islamic environment now. We're talking about a professional environment. If you were to attend a meeting of senior people from maybe a company that you work in, or senior delegates, would you look out of place? Okay, and if you look out of place, then generally you know that your haircut's problematic, because I think even we live in the West. Even those people in the West, they have certain unwritten rules that they probably adhere to.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think sometimes what's happened is I can talk from the people of the subcontinent because that's where we're from. Okay, and some people do take the absolute biscuit. Okay, with some of the hairstyles. We're recording this and Eid's not taking place as yet. But I just know that if I go out on Eid day and I see the state of the hair of some people, there's gonna be some funky and wacky designs. But that's not what we're trying to get into. That's not. I mean, there's one end of the spectrum which is like completely gone one way, and the other end of the spectrum is the stricter side. Yeah, and what we're trying to call for and what we're trying to advocate for and what we're allowing for is somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Okay, and it might be that somebody does come along who doesn't have hair which is appropriate, but again, it goes back to that thing of, are we the right person? Is it the right time to have that discussion, or does that person need a bit more time? Does that person need a bit more love? And I think that's what we're trying to get to.
I think that one of the things to take from this is that don't make things too hard on people. Sometimes there are things you just let go, and here we're just concentrating upon the basics. We get to the things of perfection later on in life. But for now, especially for the Muslim youth and stuff, I'm like, if somebody's doing good, accept him for whatever he has. That's just what I think anyway.
Okay. And finally, I think the last section that we want to talk about is, how does our clothing, how does our hairstyles, how does the way that we dress, how does that affect our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How does that affect our religiosity? Does it have a huge impact or otherwise, basically?
Right. In this one, I think you might need to stop me on a few things, but I have a lot of experiences about this, and it completely changed my mind. I completely opened my mind, and the way I look at things are completely different now. When I was in Egypt, one of my friends from America, his name is Omar. He came to Egypt at the same time, maybe a few weeks before me. He's from the subcontinent as well. His father is a scholar who studied in Pakistan. So the reason I mentioned it is just to put things into context, is that he went to study. So his father said to him, Omar, if you want to go study, go to Egypt. Inshallah, if you can enroll in Al-Azhar, go there, inshallah. Then he said to me, he said, Umar, I'm going to tell you one thing, and it's not going to make sense until you get there. So he said to him, what is it, Dad? So he said to him, he goes, Umar, when you go to Egypt, you're going to meet people. And he said, Wallahi, you're going to meet people who are wearing shirt and pants. Okay, in our community, that's shunned straight away. Shirt and pants, the person who's wearing that, he's shunned straight away. Second of all, he said to Umar, they're going to have no beards. They're going to be clean shaven. They're not going to have a stubble. But then he said, Umar, these people, because I swear by Allah, their iman is on levels that me and you can never even reach. And he said to his father, what do you mean? Because Umar, he has a beard, he's been to Pakistan, So he came to Egypt. And wallahi, not only Umar, not only myself, every single person who was there met people like this. Wallahi, they were wearing shirt and pants. Wallahi, they had no beards. But the relationship they had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the love that they had for Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is something that me and you can only dream of. I want to give you one story of mine, is that my own teacher, his name is Ustad Osama. Okay? So, he would wear shirt and pants, he had no beard. But he honored every single person who had a beard. Okay? For example, if you went to Egypt now, they call you Sheikh. Yeah, just because you have a beard, you know, even if you have a small stubble, they call you sheikh. When he would come and he would teach me. I still remember this, and this is what I'm talking about. It's what's on the inside. It's more important what's on the inside than on the outside. Is that when he used to write the words on the board and I used to write down in my notebook, wallahi, I'm not lying. Wallahi, not that spare time, maybe that 10-15 seconds. He was already like this, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. He was constantly sending durood upon the Nabi, you know, and his life and his tongue was just filled with zikr of Allah. You know, I remember he used to give me examples, you know, in grammar. Wallah, he knew the Quran like the back of his hand. Wallah, he'd give examples from here, from there, from there. And then I realized that, Wallah, don't judge anybody. You know, he might be clean shaven, he might be wearing shirt and pants, but Wallah, his connection with Allah, his love for Nabi Sallallahu is something crazy. Another example, in Egypt, the majority of them are Shafi'is. So when they pray Fajr Salah, they know the Shafi'is, beginning time, bang, they do azan, and then 20 minutes later they pray Salah. Even though there's 1 hour, 20 minutes according left until sunrise, okay? Hanafi usually pray a bit later. Wallahi, there's people you meet in Egypt, the Mu'adhin, he is in the masjid 1 hour before beginning time, meaning that hour tahajjud. And he's given azan, and he's been doing this for 20 years. And he's clean shaven, and he's wearing shirt and pants. But every single day he's awake for tahajjud, he's reading Quran, and he's giving the adhan, he's praying the Salat al-Fajr in the masjid. When you meet people like this, when you see people like this, you start to understand that wallahi, Islam is much more than the clothes that we wear and the beard that we keep and the hat that we have. It's a lot of it is to do what's on the inside, you know. And I have so many experiences. These are just two that I wanted to mention.
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct about that. Especially you're just mentioning a couple of personal experiences, but it goes beyond that. You know, trying to make people aware about, you know, that to look beyond a person's clothing, to look beyond a person's hairstyle, and you've mentioned a couple of examples that you mentioned.
These are just people. I have so many, millions, hundreds.
But what I'm saying is these examples that you're giving are people who are older, and sometimes, you know, it's harder to shake somebody who's older. You know, if a person is wearing a particular type of clothing, but we know that their iman is firm. You know, the people that you've given examples of, nobody's going to question them. You know, nobody has the guts, let's be honest, to question a 35, 40-year-old man. What we have sympathy for, and what we struggle to comprehend, and what I struggle to comprehend, Kasim, is when an 18-year-old lad comes into the masjid, okay, and they are being told in a very stern manner, or they are being reprimanded in a way which is which is not appropriate at all, okay. And I think that's the problem, you see, because imagine it's like a plant that grows, a seed that begins to grow. You know, when a seed begins to grow, when it's small, then the weather has a lot of effect on that seed and whether it grows or not. Okay, if the weather is severe, if there's too much water, if there's too much sunlight, okay, if there's too much wind, then that seed will struggle to grow, and that seed will not prosper into becoming a flower, into becoming a tree. But the difference is once that seed is established, once it begins to grow properly, and once it begins to grow up, then what tends to happen is that you can use maybe like a bamboo stick to straighten it out, because the original roots have been established.
Strong.
The stalk has begun to grow. But you try doing that to a seedling, and that seedling will wither away and die. Okay? And that's the same point that we're trying to make here. That whilst a youngster is fresh, whilst a youngster is new, whilst they are beginning their journey as a Muslim, whilst they are beginning their journey in life, if we are going to be stern, if we are going to be severe, without wisdom, then that seedling of Iman that is inside of the youngster's heart, it may die. Okay? It may not prosper. It may go crooked. It may disappear.
Yeah.
And if it does so, then we are liable for that. Okay? And all for the sake of that person's clothing.
Yeah.
And like we said, on the other hand, you know, I think the problem here is that some people have a concern that there's a saying, you know, you give somebody your finger and they take your entire arm.
Yeah.
Okay? And the saying is basically trying to say that you give some allowance, but the person, they take more than what the allowance is due. Okay? That's in its place. But here what we're saying is, if you don't give the allowance in the first place, and you're making Islam to be this very restrictive thing on a person's life, then it becomes very difficult. And I think this is what we have to understand. This is what we have to try and comprehend. What we have to bring our head around, and where and the wisdom is in allowing those things which have an allowance, those things which can go sort of under the carpet, and where we can draw the line and turn around and say, right, okay, you've crossed the line now. This is a point where you need some advice.
Yeah.
And I think this is a conversation, isn't it?
I just want to mention one thing. In Arabic, they say at-ta'meem lughat al-jahil. They say generalization is the language of an ignorant person. Now, it's very ignorant on our part now to say that every single person who wears shirt and pants has no beard. His Islam, it doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the same hand, we also said that the person who has a beard and he has a thobe and he wears a topi, then he's like the sort of ideal Muslim. No, there's exceptions in both. And I just want to mention something here which I was reading before. Again, Ali Taltawi, Allah reward him, genius. He said Islam was not built upon the length of your beard. Well, this is in his book. He goes, it's not built upon the length of your beard or how long your thobe is. He goes, Islam was built upon the ideology and the fikr, as we say, which Nabi Sallallahu gave to Sahaba. Okay? And he said because of their insight, because of their connection with Allah, because of their life, their practical life, which they show to others, Islam was able to flourish in the four corners of the world. He goes, they didn't have big speeches. And he goes, they didn't, concentrate so much on these things which are outward. It was all upon the inside. Because even I know people, wallahi, I know women who wear full niqab, but completely underneath the niqab, they westernized. And now I'm not making generalization, I'm saying some, not all. Okay, understand? Okay? Then on the other hand, women who don't wear hijab, but they pray 5 times salah, and they're asking Allah every day, give me the tawfiq, give me the ability to wear hijab. Then you have men who have beards and thobes, and they go doing the most worst of things. Again, I'm not generalizing, it's just some. Then you have men who, like we said, don't have beards, but their connection with Allah is something which is unbreakable. And this is something we need to understand, that more than our clothing, it's the fikr or our mindset and our ideology which is inside. Because let's be honest, I'll mention this, is that in the West, there have been mental warfare which have been opened up against the Muslims that Muslims don't know how to deal with. And I'm going to tell you right now, and it's going to be very, very harsh, that you cannot fight these mental warfares just by changing the way you dress. Wallahi, you can't. You cannot shun this sort of like Western sort of ideology which is coming into the minds of every single person just by changing your clothes. It's far deeper than that.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the conversation is far deeper, and is going back to the example of the seedling, we need to establish the roots of what our principles are in our heart. And this is really important. And these things take place within our younger years. As we grow older, then it's time to establish those roots and start letting the fruits grow. But if we aren't given the ability or the time or the space to let them roots establish in our younger years, then it becomes very difficult.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we've covered quite a few points today. And it's not been an easy conversation to have, and it never will be. And there will be people that will agree with what we have said, and naturally there will also be people who will disagree with what we said, and we completely appreciate that.
But like we said, it's important to get this conversation out into the public space so that youngsters understand that there's other people who understand where they're coming from.
Definitely.
Because if this conversation is not had, I'm telling you right now, it's never going to be had.
Okay. I think what we'll end with, what I would really appreciate is, if you have had an experience where you've been shunned for maybe the way that you've dressed, or the way that your hair has been, or something else that it may be, please leave a comment down below. Please tell us about your experience below. I personally want to read about it. I want to hear about what your experience might have been. And I'm sure that other people will also benefit from reading about these experiences as well. So if you have ever had an experience like this, please leave a comment below. If you want to remain anonymous, then drop us an email. The email can be below, and we'll post your comment on your behalf to ensure that your anonymity is preserved. At the same time, please also like the video, please subscribe to the channel as well, and share with your friends and your family, so we can continue our journey, and we get encouragement from yourselves of continuing this journey as well. That's all for us. The next episode, Kasim, we're talking about food. But is it going to be a bit more light-hearted?
I hope so.
Okay.
Obviously, this one was a bit more deeper and a bit more emotional, but yeah, inshallah, next episode will be about food. I know we're not going to be eating food in front of you and rating it 1 out of 10, but yeah, our discussion will be about food, and we just leave it at that, inshallah, keep you guys intrigued.
Okay. What's your favorite food?
Out of chicken. Out of the meat as well. Out of everything.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Jazakallah khair for listening. See you in the next one, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.